All right. Hey guys, welcome back to the Melanin Margin. I'm your host, Quaviondre Williams.
And I'm Daquon Wilson.
And this is the talk show dedicated to bringing the marginalized to the spotlight and uplift the Black voices that will no longer stay silent. So let's get into this week's race conversation, dating outside of your race. Now, Daquon, as an African American, do you believe that dating outside of your race is anti-Black?
No, not at all. I think that when it comes to dating outside of your race, like it's one of those things that I feel like in the Black community there's a lot of like stigma sometimes of like, oh, you're dating outside of race because like you hate your race, or there's something internal that like forces you to date outside of the race, which sometimes happens. Like sometimes there are people who have so much internalized racism and anti-Blackness that like they don't see Blackness as attractive, or they see themselves as like the exception. But I think in general, just like somebody wanting to date outside of their race, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, I completely agree. I never really understood that whole argument that people have with that. Because, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm all about celebrating Black love, absolutely. But I don't think that love has a race. I don't think that just because you date a white person as a Black person, that automatically makes you a racist, or you hate yourself, or you hate who you are. It's kind of like, I feel like there's definitely a lot of people who have that belief system, which really doesn't make any sense to me, because it's like I just never understood where it came from. Like, where this idea that if you fall in love with someone who does not look like you, that is a problem. Like, that is an issue that needs to be discussed. Like, specifically when we talk about like people having these relationships, and it's kind of like, the reality is, in life, you're supposed to expose yourself to multiple cultures. You're
Mm-hmm.
supposed to expose yourself to multiple races. That's how you are a fully well-rounded individual, I would assume. So in exposing yourself to multiple cultures and races, it might be likely that you might end up dating someone outside of your race.
Exactly. I think it's one of those things that I feel like there's this, I don't know, fear that comes with dating outside of the race, just because of like thinking about, everything that's happened to Black people in this country. I think like part of it, for some people at least, is like a defense mechanism or something like that. Because like at the end of the day, like we're not that far from Jim Crow and all of these different like segregation and everything. Like, for example, like my parents went to segregated schools. So like we're not that far. Yeah.
Are you serious?
Yeah, I think my dad integrated schools, like middle school or high school. So that's literally how recent things are when it comes to just like, I mean, even today there's totally all different types of like racism in the world. But kind of getting back on track, like it's one of those things that as a defense mechanism people see like, oh well, like well, white people do all these things to Black people, so I'm not gonna like date outside of my race. I'm gonna stay with people who understand me. And it kind of brings up an interesting question of like, in having this defense mechanism or like responses to trauma, like, is that a problematic preference to only date Black people because racism?
Because racism. But I think that there is definitely a conversation that needs to be had about, you know, having relationships within the race and dating outside, and how that relates to personal preference. I definitely think that's a real conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when it comes to the idea that, if you should only date Black people because that is how we keep it strong, or how we, combat the defense. And it's kind of like, it's definitely, because I'm trying to figure out the best way to say this. Like, I understand where it comes from,
Right.
because for so long, we take this back to segregation and to slavery, where white masters or white women and white men, male and female white masters would rape their black slaves. You know, white women would rape the black men, and then the black men would be hung or killed because the woman had a baby, or that she claimed to be raped by them. Or the black man, the white master would rape the black woman, and then she would have mulatto babies, kind of thing. You know, and I understand where the hesitation comes from. I want to make that clear. There is definitely more than enough history that proves that white people ain't always here for us, and that there is this fetishization of black men and women in our society. There is definitely a conversation there, and I definitely believe that when people say you should focus on black love, you should do that, or whatever the case may be, like, I fully understand where it's coming from. I understand where it's coming from, and I understand why you're saying that. I don't think that that's right, though, because again, while I do believe that white people should be held accountable for their racist actions, I do not believe that all white people should, I do not believe that all white people, okay, here we go. All white people benefit from racism, and all white people benefit from the racist institution that was in place by their ancestors. However, not all white people are consistently perpetuating those institutions. You know? So I feel like when it comes to a relationship, it's about understanding that this, as long as that white person, so we're specifically with interracial, as long as that white person is not perpetuating those same institutions and not and fetishizing you as a black person, I feel like there's no problem with that. But like I said before, I fully understand where that comes from. What about you?
Yeah, I'm kind of on the same page as you. Like, I get it. I get it from like so many different levels. Like, you want to protect your heart. You want to save yourself from all of that trauma. And I also understand it from like the perspective of just like when you date outside of your race, there's going to be so much like catching up you need to do. You know, there's so many different like cultural competencies in the Black community that's just like, oh, well, like if I date outside of my race, I'm going to have to like try to explain all of this to them, or they're not going to understand, or like, you know, or having conversations about race and y'all coming from different angles. Like, you want to make sure you have somebody aligned with you. But like at the end of the day, also like Black people are not a monolith. So like just because you're dating a Black person doesn't mean that they don't have like internalized racism. You know, they could be all different types of things. So like I agree. Like at a certain point, you know, protect your heart, but also don't shut somebody out just because.
And I fully agree with what you're saying. I think that that really does. I have to say, that's why we talked about this in our previous episode about trauma films and how they affect you to this day, and they kind of reignite and re-traumatize people. Because the reality is, I'm not gonna lie to you, when I watched 12 Years a Slave, like when I watched these like egregious acts against people like me, I'm not gonna lie to you, for like a good week after watching those films, I'm like, fuck all white people. Like, I'm like, I mean, like, because it re-traumatizes you. It's like, you know, you're not experiencing it, but seeing people who look like you experience such blatant and disgusting racism in these films, and be whipped and to be raped and to be this and then that and this and that, it consistently re-traumatizes the brain. So that's why I say, like, I fully understand where the focus of Black love is. I think that there's a problem when, like you said before, it becomes a argument where it becomes like you don't like Black people if you aren't dating another Black person. It's kind of like, I feel like that's where it becomes a problem, because the reality is, you know, the idea of celebrating Black love should be just that, celebrating Black love when it happens. But it should not be an attack. You see what I'm saying? Saying Black love should not be an attack on an interracial relationship.
Exactly.
But that's what it's turned into.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's one of those things that, you know, having a hesitation on dating outside of a race is perfectly fine, because that's a hesitation. But
Yes.
if you're saying like, oh, Black love is the only way, like there's just so much that's against that. Like, let
Yeah.
people love who they love at the end of the day, because that's who they fall in love with. Like, you know, you don't really have control over who you fall in love with.
Absolutely. And speaking back to the fetishization of Black people, Black men and women equally, I wanted to ask you, have you ever had experiences with white people where it seemed as though they were only trying to be interested in you because you were African American, or have you seen it in your life with your friend groups?
Yeah, I've definitely seen it a lot. It's one of those things that just like, I think that's another like hesitation so many people have. And like, that's also a barrier why so many people don't necessarily want to date outside of the race.
Yeah.
Like, when you get in a relationship, it's like, are they doing this because they like me, or do they like what I look like? Do they like
Mm,
my skin? Do they like my hair?
hmm
Do they want to exoticize certain black features and they want that? So like, yeah, I've definitely seen it so many times, and I think it's like absolutely disgusting because it's like you're fetishizing a human being. Like, at the end of the day, like, you can have like a kink for like high heels, or all of these
hmm
different things that are like acceptable, or you know anything like that. But when it comes down to like race, that's where it kind of, you're drawing the line.
I fully agree. I think that there is definitely a disgusting fetishization that goes on in this community, the white community, because I've seen it often, not only in my friend groups or people that I've been around, but also personally for me in my personal experience. I remember a couple when I was in middle school, like a lot, and this is what really this is what really pisses me off, because you would oftentimes see white girls, like the ones who try to act black, and they do this thing where they're like they specifically seek out black men as a act of rebellion against their white parents.
Mhm.
And that shit pisses me off. Like, you'll hear the girls like, oh honey, I only date black men, and my mom and my dad don't like it, but I date who I want to date, blah 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 blah. It's kind of like, girl, like, what the fuck does them having to be black have to do with you and your parents' situation? You know what I'm saying? Like, we are not a tool to make your parents angry or upset. Like, we're not a tool for you to be like, oh yeah, look at me, dad, I'm doing something crazy. I'm dating a black person. I'm crazy, ain't it, daddy? It's like, stop trying to use us to stick it to your parents, you know?
Yeah, like that even goes into like a larger conversation of people weaponizing blackness as a way of rebellion. Miley Cyrus, but we're not gonna go there today.
Well, we gonna get to that. Oh, we gonna get to that another episode.
But yeah,
But
I
yeah,
think that
fully.
like one of those things that like it's absolutely disgusting, and like, even being real, like it's not just white people that do it. Like,
Oh
people who
yes.
are in the Latino community, Latinx community do it. There are people in the Asian community that like
Yeah.
everywhere does it.
One of my friends said that he said that like black men in like certain like Japan or like Korea or certain countries are like, what is it, like almost ogled, like they're like some what is it called, like a zoo animal, like, oh my god, your hair and your blood, you're this, and why is your skin so this and that and the fourth, and it's kind of like, baby, this isn't a zoo. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not a attraction for you. And it really, when I see stuff like that, you know what it brings me back to, Daquon? It gives me the imagery of, I don't know who it was specifically, but there's a story about this black woman a long time ago who was like, because of her hips and her butt and her, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I forget the name, but I know the story.
She's put on display, and like white people are like, oh my God, look at her butt. Why is it so big? And look at her breast. Why is this so big? And I'm like, when I saw it brings me back to that. It's almost like, oh my God, your skin and your hair and you're this and you're that. And it's like, I don't understand. I understand where it comes from, but it's like, it's the fact that people think that that's something to be like, that's something to be like, oh yes, that's what I want. That's what I want from my girl. I want from my whatever. It's kind of like, while it is common for black people to have certain features and certain body types or whatever the case may be, that should not be the sole reason as to why you're with us. Like,
Right.
I have to say, Daquon, and it's especially prevalent in the gay community.
Whew.
And I have to say that honestly, it has made it so difficult for me to trust white men or trust people, other people who are not black on these apps, because I would oftentimes match with people who would be like, oh my God, I want to see that big black this and the blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, who the, hold up?
You can't say hello, how are
What is
you?
my
You can't
name?
say hey.
Hello. What is or I want to oh, I love black guys. Black guys are so this, black guys are so that, and blah 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 blah. And I'm like, I cringe. It makes me cringe because I'm like, what about me as a person? Like, yes, I am African American, but I'm also a person too. African American is a part of my identity, but it's not all of my identity. And
Correct.
that's kind of what we're boiled down to, especially the way I've seen in the gay community. It's either been white guys would be really into black guys for sex, mostly, not for relationships, but mostly as a sexual gratification or thrill. And they would have no interest in being in a relationship with us. That's what I've seen in my experience with this since I was 16. White men would either be, like I said, very interested in like, oh, I want to fuck a black guy, I want to have some fun, or whatever the case may be, and just not be in a relationship with you, or they would be completely like, I don't date blacks.
And that's where that preference come in. They always be like, oh, it's just a preference. It's just a preference. Like, let's, go back to like what preference means. Like, for example, I prefer apples. That doesn't mean I don't eat oranges. Oranges are,
Yeah,
but if I had a choice between an apple and an orange, I'd probably go with the apple. But if the apple's not available, I'll still eat the orange. That's preference right there. Like, if you are completely excluding a whole entire group of people, that's not you having a preference. Like,
that's racist.
it's problematic at the end of the day, because
And
you can't boil down people to like a caricature.
I fully agree. That's why that's why I've always said that preference is problematic on so many levels, because people do not use that term correctly. Because this is what I'll say. I don't have a problem with people saying, I have, in my past experience, I have enjoyed dating black men because of this, that, and the fourth. That to me isn't so much a problem. But when you say things like, I only date black men, or I only date white men, or I only date this kind of person, it's like, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that you saying that you prefer to date black men is like I don't know what level it's racist or not. Like, I feel like it's kind of like teetering the line.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've said oftentimes before that for me personally, like I really have a interest in Hispanic men, like Latinx men. Like, I love me a Latinx man. But that does not mean that I wouldn't date an Asian man, a black man, a white man, or whatever it gets to be. But I think that there is I have a, what is it called? Greater interest
Mm-hmm.
in Latinx men. And I
You have a
think that,
preference.
huh?
You have an actual preference.
Yes, and it's like, yeah, I like Latinx men, but I don't only date Latinx men. You see what I'm saying? And I think that that's where it becomes a concern. I think that when you say like, I like to date black, there we go. I like to date black men, but I don't only date black men. Now I've had this argument with so many people when we've talked about it before, because I talked about this when I was back in middle school, and I was like, people would say that I'm kind of, that's dumb as shit, because like, you are excluding an entire race of people by saying, and there were so many and there's so many people who will say those words and think that they're like, it's just a preference. So don't come for me, it's a preference, it's a preference. I only date white girls, it's a preference, it's a preference. And it's like, no, saying only denotes specificity.
Right.
When you say I only, you are saying everybody else is trash, but this particular kind of person, or this particular type. Like, you're not saying like, oh, I'm interested in like black men because I really love black culture, and I really love whatever the case may be, and I love what they teach me and stuff like that. Whatever. No, like for me, the reason I like Latinx men is because I love Latinx culture. I think it's beautiful, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate it from a distance. And and like I said before, that's a lot of the reason why I do find myself, and I love the Spanish language and stuff like that. So that's why I do, like I said, I do have a attraction towards Latinx men. But like I said before, I'm not saying I'm exclusively only, dating that person. So I think that there's where do you think that line comes, Daquon? Like, what do you think there's the line between only preferencing something and making it racist, or just having an interest or a attraction towards that specific kind?
I think the line comes from like your reasonings behind a certain decision. Like, if it's one of those things where you just like, you want something very physical, like you want BBC or whatever like that. Like that is problematic, and that is just like, don't do that. If you're saying you don't date black people because they're ghetto or blah blah blah, like again, you are boiling people down to stereotypes. That's problematic. Get that out of here. But if you have like a preference between because of certain experiences you've had, and it's one of those things that you are not actively excluding anything, you're not actively like boiling down people down to stereotypes or caricatures, that's when it becomes more okay, because then you have like actual reasoning behind that. Like sure, people do still like be like, oh well, like I just really love black culture, but they're still like kind of fetishizing black culture, and they just want that, ticket in. They just want that, oh, I can go to the cookout now because I got a black person on my arm. Like, no, that's still like partly problematic, because you're only trying to get into it without like actually appreciating it from a distance.
Okay, I want to ask you something. Do you think that what I said could be construed as problematic to some extent?
I think that what you said, like, depending on like your reasoning, like if you went more into it, like why you like Latinx culture so much, it could be. But like if it's just like you appreciate it from a distance, and there are certain values that like a lot of Latinx people in your experience have that you really align with, that's probably fine. The problem comes when you're just only doing it for their culture.
Yeah, I think that I fully understand. Like I said, this is we are honest on this podcast and this talk show. So I really want to, because I never said I was perfect, and Daquon never said they were perfect either. So I think that I really want to discuss that, because it's like just a little bit further about that. Because I mean, like I said before, I try my best to be as worldly and open as possible, and to check myself whenever I do make certain mistakes, like mistakes or whatever. And I feel like, when it comes to that idea, the way I see it is that, like, it's not, for me, I say that it isn't a problem to say that, or it's not a problem to be like, in my experience, Latinx men have been the guys that I've been attracted to the most, or black men, or white men, or whatever the case may be, in your experience.
Mm-hmm.
Saying that, I feel that where the problem comes is when you say, this is the only person I like because of X, Y, and Z. And like you said before, everything X, Y, and Z is nothing but stereotypical ideas about it. You see what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
I feel like, for me, I don't think that, like I said, saying that you're interested, or that in your experience you have had more attraction towards because of X, Y. Like for me, like I said before, for Latinx men, for me, in my experience, I found that those are the guys that I've been attracted to because of, like I said before, my appreciation of a Latinx culture, and my appreciation for the shared experience. Because as a African American, a Latinx person also understands what it's like to be for colorism. They understand colorism. They understand being judged by the color of your skin. They understand what it's like to have your culture being stolen. So you see what I'm saying? So these things, I think, are what align me towards that, just like it aligned me towards Black people and other people of color. But like I said before, it's just, for me, I've had a kinship mostly towards that. But like I said before, I have been attracted to Asian men. I have been attracted to white men. I've been definitely attracted to some Black men, baby. And those things. So I feel like that's where that comes from. Do you agree or disagree with that, Daquon?
Yeah, I would say I agree with you. I think it's like, if you are more attracted to certain people just because, like, hey, we both experience racism, we can have like greater conversations and have like greater understanding of each other because we come from similar backgrounds, even if it's not the same, then like, yeah, that's fine. If you were trying to do it because like, oh, I just want to go to like some fiestas, or go to a day of the
Yeah.
type celebration, like that's when it gets problematic, because I think like even in just like appreciating a culture, like at the end of the day, not every person is actively involved in their culture. Like not every Black person is really involved with Black culture. Not every
Yes.
Latinx person is very involved in Latinx culture. And that like, that multiplies when you especially think about like immigrant communities, because a lot of
Yes.
times immigrant parents will try to Americanize their children so that they don't have to like feel like immigrants or something like that.
Yeah, I definitely think that there was, like I said before, say boiling it down to a like you said, specifics of, because for me, like I said before, it's the shared experience. Like I said, it is the appreciation of Latinx culture. But like you said before, even when I said like, oh, I enjoy Spanish, like you said before, not all Latinx people speak Spanish.
Right.
And that is problematic. What I literally just said in this conversation. So I think that this is a growing moment for me, a moment of growth to understand my own what is it called, my own problematic preference, because there are problematic elements to what I've just said. And I didn't even realize it until I just brought it up in this conversation with you. So I think that is definitely definitely something to really kind of look at and say, well, why are you attracted to that?
Right.
And to realize, oh, wait a minute, that actually might be a little bit racist.
Yeah, like it's not enough to just be like, oh, I have this preference. Like you should really be able to interrogate that preference. So if somebody comes to you and be like, oh, so why do you have this preference? Like what is it for? Or just like how we had this conversation, just being like, oh, why do you have this preference? Kind of going in the ins and out of like what we feel like is problematic or not. Like you should be able to like have your mind kind of not made up, because I think as human beings, we always need to be able to like grow and evolve and not like not be closed-minded, but like you should be able to like talk about like why you have a preference.
And understanding where it's coming from too,
Right.
and realizing, like you just said before, even though I appreciate Latinx culture, I appreciate the language, I appreciate the that part of it. The reality, even the reality of boiling it down to the fact that at the end of the day, not all Latinx people share the same experience either when it comes to racism, because some of them are a little bit lighter in complexion and may not have had the same experience. So I realized in having this conversation with you that my preference, or even as open as I thought I was, there was definitely some problematic elements to my own ideology. And realizing that that's how we grow as people, to understand that I can't bog a Latinx person down to their language, their culture, because they're more than just that.
Right. And you have
Just
to
as
be
I
willing
don't,
to have these conversations. Like just how we had this conversation, I never like was like, you're racist, sis. Like and she wasn't like, oh, it's just my preference. Like, don't come for me. Or like we literally just hashed it out right there.
and I think that's the reality in the situation, and realizing, like I said, even in my own mind, we take on the traits of the oppressor.
Mm.
As that, and that is literally just in this conversation alone, we have already just seen that in action. Is that as a Black person, I, in a deeper part of me that I didn't even realize, I was fetishizing a culture of people, not even realizing that, and realizing how problematic that is. And the same should be done with white people watching this or listening to this. Look at why you're attracted to Black men, or you only date Black men. It's like, no, baby, that comes from fetishization. You shouldn't be focused on aspects of that person. You should be focused on who that person is. If you're gonna have a preference for anything, it should be, are they a kind person? Do they respect their family? Are they generous? That's what you should be focused on. That's what we should be focused on. And I feel like that, like I said, in this conversation, I was able to grow and see when they had explained it to me just now. Oh my God. In this just realizing my own problematic ideologies that I had to that I'm working through on my own, like having these conversations and understanding understanding where this preference comes from, breaking it down. Like you just said, when you said the fact of like, well, you can't just be like interested in people just because of their culture, because not everybody is raised in that culture. Not every Latinx person comes from that culture. Yeah, they might be a Latinx person, but they may not have been raised in Mexican culture, Puerto Rican culture. They may not speak Spanish, and to say that I'm interested in them because of those things is in a word racist, in a word prejudice to some extent. But that's how we grow. That's how we grow as people. So I wanted to ask you as well, when it comes to dating a person of another race, especially with white people specifically, people of color dating white people, when do we have the conversation about race, or should we have the conversation about race?
You should always have the conversation about race. I don't think I'm the best person to ask for this, just because like the conversation, for me at least, comes up so early. But also, I'm an African American studies major. I've literally studied race and all types of things in our society for the past 4 years. So like that's just naturally something I'm passionate about. So like even in a basic conversation, I'm probably going to bring up race in some extent, whether it be like we're talking about music or movies or like that comes up for me. But I think that, you know, early on, the conversation about race should come up. You know, I've had this time, ooh, child, this is a story. I had this time when I was talking to somebody who was white. And, you know, we got along really well, like, but we didn't talk about like race or anything like that. And I went over to their house and their parents were like the most conservative people ever, Confederate flags in the house, like I swear, you know, the dad was a part of the Klan or something like that. I was like, at this point, it's been fun talking to you, but I'm going to have to depart.
I'm gonna clock out real quick. I'm gonna go ahead and clock out. I feel you on that. That's not the Confederate flag, Daquon.
I was like, you could have gave me a warning.
But I fully think, honestly and truly, I think that race, having that conversation, especially if you're with if you're not dating a person of color, as a person of color, if you're dating a white person as a person of color, I think that race is among the first conversation you should have. I think,
Right.
because for me, I can't date a white person who doesn't understand it when I say, you benefit from racism. You see what I'm saying? I can't date someone. I can't date. I can't. I need to. I don't want to use the term woke, but I can't date someone who is not aware.
Right. Socially conscious.
Socially conscious. I like that word. A phrase. I like that because that I feel like if you're not socially conscious, then that means that you. Because once again, while we shouldn't base our preferences or our attraction on race, I do feel like race is definitely a aspect of the relationship that needs to be discussed. Because the reality is the last thing I need to do is to run into, like you said before, a situation where, you know, because the reality is we are, as Black people, we have to think about race.
All the time.
Every day. It's a when we wake up to when we go to bed, you know? And I feel like with white people, not that the white privilege is not being able to talk about or think about race. That's what white privilege is, where race has literally no effect on your life whatsoever. And
Right.
I feel like with dating a white person, I always bring it up really fast. I'm like, so, you know, what made you attracted to me? Or why are you attracted to me? What about it? And if you start your conversation with, well, I just love Black people. I just love, block,
Ooh.
delete, or I just whatever. It's like, no, I need some real reasonings behind why you're with me. I need to understand where your mind is. You know, I like you said, BBC, girl, no, like all that's not, because you're bogging me down to stereotypes that may or may not be true. You see what I'm saying? Like, that's the thing that really frustrates me about it, is that people bog stuff down to that aspect. And it's kind of like, you know, when it comes to these things, when it comes to dating someone who does not share a similar experience like a person of color, if you're dating someone who literally has never had to deal with race in their entire life, like white people, you have to have this discussion to make sure that y'all are in the same headspace and that you're going to understand, hey, baby, people are going to look at me like this when we go certain places. People are going to look at us certain ways. People are going to, if I get pulled over, like in that movie, Get Out, like people are there. These are things that happen.
Right. And even
not Get Out, the movie, not that specifically, but you know what I mean? Like people, when she was a white woman and he was a Black man, but he was driving the car and they pulled him over.
Right.
It's like, these are things you have to think about. And when I say, baby, what you did, and I feel like, and I don't mean to cut you off, Daquon, but yeah. I really want to say this point real quick. I think that what people seem to forget is that what I need people to know is that if I'm dating a white person, if I'm in a relationship with a white person and something racist happens, I need them to be able to understand why what happened was racist, and I need them to understand when I check them on their racism. Because it's inevitable.
Right. Yeah, I was just getting ready to say that. I think that it's so important like for me to date somebody who is socially conscious, because like when we have things like um all of these different racist things, when we have like very large displays of like police brutality, when we have very large displays of outright racism, when there's Klan rallies and all of these things that are happening in the world, like that's a lot to handle. That's a lot on me mentally. So it's important for like somebody that I'm dating not only to understand that, but also understand like, hey, like, you know, I know what this can put you through. Like I'm gonna show you care and like do all of
Mm-hmm.
that things. Because at the end of the day, like the last thing I want to do in those situations is have to try to educate somebody, because I'm focused on like making sure I have the care that I need to like mentally get through that time.
I'm not Google. I'm not Google. I'm not how to not be a racist. And I also want to ask you something. I wanted to bring this point up too. There was something that the actor who played in Black Panther, the one who played not the villain, but the one who the friend of T'Challa,
Mm-hmm.
he said something that I thought was really impactful. And he was like, and I'm gonna tell you this quick story. He said that let's say a person gets robbed, right? They call the police. They're like, "Hey, police, somebody robbed my house." And they're like, oh, "Okay, come on into the station and talk about it," right? So the person goes to the station, right? They go to the station, like, "Okay, somebody robbed my house. What do I do?" And they're like, "Okay, just sit in a cell for me, okay, real quick. We're gonna have you sit in a cell, and we're gonna go and figure out what's happening, what's going on. We'll get with you in just a second." And we're like, "Okay, you sit in the cell. This is kind of weird. You sit in the cell, but all right." Then they take you out of the cell and go put you in the interrogation room. And they sit down with you and they're like, "So why do you think you were robbed?" And the point of his story, that story that he told, was the fact that in our society, we have this ideology that we should ask the victim why the perpetrator did what they did. The same is true of Black people. Why are we constantly being asked about how to solve racism when we were the ones who are a product of it, a victim of it?
Right.
So in that situation, bringing up that discussion, do you think that there is a double standard when it comes to dating interracially? I can't even say the word.
Yeah, I think there is. I think it's one of those things that like I've kind of noticed that, you know, a lot of times Black women get a lot more flack for dating interracially than like Black men. Like there's plenty of times when you have like a Black male like um celebrity or whatever, and they date a white person or whatever, and it's like, "Oh, you know, that's just who they are." But a lot of times I see when it's a Black woman dating a Black man, then it's like, "Oh, this is why Black women aren't for Black men," or just like all of these different things that I find kind of disgusting, because like I said before, love is love. Love is going to find you regardless of the race or anything. But I do think that there have been a lot of double standards at times when it comes to who's allowed to date interracially and who's not.
Yes, I just want to make a quick point real quick. The actor I was talking about was Daniel Kaluuya. Kaluuya, I think is how you say it.
Mhm.
But yes, speaking back to your point, I do think that when it comes to interracial dating, there is definitely a more leniency for certain people to date outside of their race versus others. Like I there's definitely you see it often when it comes to, like you said before, Black men, that they're seen to given this pass. They're like, you date white women, you're fine. But the moment a Black woman dates a white man, it's like
Anti-Black.
anti-Black immediately. And don't get me wrong, there are Black women who do check white Black men on it, but they're not. It's not to the same degree.
Right.
And I think I think that's an institution of patriarchy, honestly. I think that's where it comes from, because men are oftentimes given a slap on the wrist, whereas women are given the whole full throttle. And I think that in this particular situation, we shouldn't be well, I will say this, and I want to get your opinion on this. I don't think that we should attack people for dating interracially, but I will say that there is this really toxic idea that we see within Black celebrities, specifically Black male celebrities, whether they be rappers, actors, or whatever. But it almost seems as if dating a white woman is the cornerstone of making it.
Mm.
And I wanted to ask your opinion on that. If you notice the same thing, it seems as if when we see these Black men succeed, either they're dating a really, 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 really light-skinned woman, or a ethically, what is it called, a culturally ambiguous woman,
Mm-hmm.
or a white woman.
Mm. Yeah, I feel you on that. I think it's one of those things that, like, in general, we shouldn't blame people for falling in love with who they fall in love with. But I also don't think it's like out of possibility to have some critiques. Just because, like, I think in a case of a lot of rappers or, celebrities that we should critique, there's a lot of evidence of them being colorist or, calling Black women roaches or ghetto or all of these different things. And I think that, like, if you date a white woman, fine. But you dating a white woman while also putting down Black women as being inferior, that's problematic.
Yes, and I really want to touch back on that. Like, it really is like, and I've seen people discuss this often, but it seems as if it's kind of like Black men, and not all of them. Of course, like I said, there's definitely probably just people who just date and this happens to be white.
Right.
But there is this kind of commonality where it's like, there's this colorist dialogue and this racist dialogue being perpetuated by Black men who are like, I did date Black women, but now I exclusively date white women. Or like I said before, white women seem to be almost the hallmark of Black success, because it's almost kind of an affront to slavery, an affront to the idea that a Black man can't get a white woman, and to get a white woman is to succeed, kind of, quote unquote. And I think that's oftentimes seen even in the gay community, where I have seen Black men say, I can't date a Black man. I'm like, oh,
you are
like that's what I was like, I'm confusion. Like, people have said, and I've seen, and I've had to have full arguments with gay men. I'm like, you are literally saying that you would not date a Black man, but you would date a white man, no question. Right. It's all, and like it's almost as if they're like this commodity, like, ooh, I can date a white man. Why would I date a black? No, why would I can date a white man? So it seems to be this commodification, or this kind of, this idea that whiteness is a form, like, it's almost like Black men, certain Black men date white men or white women as a way of saying, as if their superiority or the white supremacy or the white whatever will rub off.
Yeah, like they'll get a little, scribblings of privilege by dating somebody, but like it doesn't work like that. And I think at the end of the day, like, you don't need to defend you dating a white person by putting down other people.
And speaking back to the fact of how our society has almost had a shift towards Blackness, I've seen many, 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 many TikToks and Instagram posts and YouTube videos about white men going, oh, I date Black women or Black girls. Ha ha, yes, I love Black girls. I love blah, blah. And I'm like, go girl, give us nothing. Like, you know what I mean? Like, give us the minimum. Like, you're literally saying, oh, I date Black girls. Ha ha. And it's kind of like, why should we supposed to lift you up because of that?
Yeah, like, honestly, I think that's less than the minimum. Like, to be honest, every time I've seen one of those like TikToks, I'm like, ooh, this doesn't look cute. Like, this looks like fetishization. Like, it does, because like at the end of the day, like, why are you, like, there's nothing wrong with you loving a Black person, but like, what do you expect to get out of it? You expect to like get TikTok followers just because you like to, like, that's exploiting Black women for clout. Like,
Daquon, when I see this stuff and like the likes and the comments, like, oh yes, 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 yes. And it's like, first of all, We don't know who the fuck this man is. Number one, we don't know what kind of man he is, how he treats his Black women or whatever the case may be. And it's like, it's always like, well, I love chocolate and blah, 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 blah. And once again, stereotyping. Once again, specifically talking about physical attributes of the Black women, of the Black woman that they're dating versus just them being happening to, like, I want to date someone that I love who happens to be whatever race they are. Their race should not have anything to do with why I'm in a relationship with them.
Right.
From this conversation, that is what I have learned, is that race should not be a factor in why you're dating someone. And the fact that white men are commodifying dating Black women and getting clout and followers and money just for doing the literally nothing, doing literally nothing but saying the words. And we don't know if they actually are dating Black people. That's the...
Listen, the worst is when they're like, oh, I love Black women, but they're silent for Black Lives Matter.
Oh,
what happened to your love for Blackness?
I'm sorry, what was that?
I didn't hear you.
I didn't hear anything.
Women, but like, you can't say BLM.
And that's the thing. I think that goes back to the reality that in the media, interracial relationships are put to the forefront as not just something that is like still quote unquote taboo, but also something that is, like I said, almost performance. Like it's a theatrical, it's something that draws people in, like two different worlds, like whatever. So I want to ask you, Daquon, do you think that how interracial relationships are portrayed in the media affects us and how we view those white men and women who say, I date Black women, I date whatever?
100%. Like I remember, I forgot what it was, but it was like I think Cheerios commercial that had an interracial family. And like, they got so much hate for it. They got literally so much hate for simply having an interracial family on a Cheerios commercial. And it's one of those things that like, just like seeing people's visceral responses to something as simple as an interracial couple, it's kind of disgusting. But also I think that there's a lot of times when people kind of utilize the whole interracial couple thing to like, I don't know, have like this kind of Romeo and Juliet moment where it's like, oh, our families don't want to see us together, but our love is so unrequited. And it's like, yeah, sure, like that happens sometimes. But also like we said, with so many different things regarding Hollywood and media, like let's start subverting some narratives. Let's just have people in love, being in love.
And I mean, and I want to comment, like, I'm not saying that I don't want to see interracial relationships. That's not what I'm saying. But even in these interracial relationships, have you noticed that it's oftentimes still people who are not very obviously Black? They just are kind of, once again, that cultural ambiguity kind of thing, where it's like they're that really, really sandy Black color.
Right.
Or brown color. Like it's almost like they're saying like it's interracial because he's Black, but they're also very, very light skinned. You don't really often see very dark skinned people in interracial relationships that are put to the forefront in the media. So I want to ask you, Daquon, do you think that interracial relationships or women or white women who date have interracial couples, whatever the case may be, do you think that they should be celebrated for that?
No, it's not like, like, you know, I appreciate love. Love is love. It's great. Like, let's celebrate love in general, but like celebrating love just because you're loving somebody that's not your race, like, it's one of those things that like you don't get a cookie for not being racist. Like, that's not how it works.
I fully agree. I think that what really frustrates me, there was a couple about a week or two ago, I was at my job, and there was this woman this white woman who was talking about a man who had came to her and said like, oh, I think you're being racist, whatever the case to be. And she was like, well, you don't know my life. I have a Mexican husband and I have an interracial family. I can't possibly be racist. So you just need to get the fuck out of my. And I was like the whole time, because she was supervisor, so I was about to pop off, but I was like, nah, I don't want to get fired. But I was like, the reality is when I heard her say that, I was like, baby, you having an interracial relationship does not absolve you from prejudice.
Not at all.
Like, you having a Mexican boyfriend or Latinx boyfriend or having a black man or a black woman does not make you not racist. That's not how that works. That's not how racism, institutionalized racism works. That's not how it works. And I've seen it so often where even people who, like that white guy, I don't know who he was, a long time ago, I think it was a governor or something, but he said, I'm sorry I'm late, I was on black people time. And he thought he could make that joke because yeah, I know, bitch. Yeah. He said I was on black people time. And it was because he had a black wife and interracial children. It's kind of like, baby, that does not mean that what you said was not racist as fuck.
Right.
You having a black woman doesn't. So I think there's this kind of conversation where people think that, like I said before, in that situation, when I was just talking about earlier about having a preference towards Latinx men or whatever the case may be, that was in a way, that was fetishizing Latinx men for a culture that they may or may not be a part of. And that is in a way racist. And the reality is, if I were to date a Latinx person, or if I was in a relationship currently with a Latinx person, I can't be like, oh, that wasn't racist what I said because I'm dating my man is blank or blank or blank. It's like, no, what I said could still be prejudiced or stereotypical to some extent. And it does not absolve me from it because I have a man who is of that culture of persuasion. You see what I'm saying? It doesn't absolve me from that. What about you? Do you think that too?
Yeah, I agree. Like, dating somebody who's black does not absolve you of your racism in any sort of way, because at the end of the day, like, you can still have so many different problematic views or,
Yes.
internalized racist views. You just don't necessarily express them every day, or you don't like, you got to do a lot more unpacking. Like, if you think, oh, I have, like, it's the same conversation with, like, I have a black friend. Like,
Yes.
just because you have a black friend does not mean you understand the entire black experience. That does not give you a card into black culture, AAVE, any of that stuff. That does not give you a card where it's like, I'm not racist. Like, no, like, if you want to say you're not racist, then you need to be doing actively anti-racist things every day. You need to be donating money. You need to be, being an activist, going to places, actually making change. Like, that's how you can say I'm not racist.
Absolutely. And I think that in the situation, I think what people seem to forget in life is that we are constantly growing. We are even as a black people, we are constantly trying to take those, take away the traits of the oppressor that are instinct, that are, what is it called? Bogged into us, put into us from children, know? And I think that in this situation, especially specifically in this episode, where I spoke about that, and like I said, having a preference or whatever the case may be, realizing how what I said was racist and what I said was prejudiced to some extent because I was putting an entire race on a certain kind of situation, which is not the case. And I think that if I had a Latinx boyfriend, they would check me and say, hey, bitch, what you said was fucking stupid and racist. And don't say that shit again because that's wrong. And I can't be like, well, I'm dating you. Like,
right.
Well, I'm dating you, so I can't possibly be that. And I think that that's why you should have a diverse friend group and a diverse preference, or not preference, a diverse dating pool, because the reality is my best friend, my big brother, is Laotian, Asian American. And I have said things before that have been racist against Asian people to some extent that I didn't know may have been racist. Because we take on the traits of the oppressor, we take on things that we don't even know. Oh, wait a minute, that actually, what I just said could actually be construed as racist. And he's like, hey, bitch, that's stupid as fuck. Don't do that shit. That's racist because of X, Y, and Z. And I was like, oh shit, you're right. That's racist as fuck. I wasn't like, oh, I am black.
How dare you?
How dare you? Yeah, like I said before, having people who are trans, having people who are of other persuasions, like understanding, having Having that diversity in your friend group helps you grow as a person. I'm not sitting there saying I was saying some, anti-Asian things, but the reality is the things that I had said were microaggressions that I didn't know I said. And he was like, bitch, what the fuck is that? And he said things that have been microaggressions towards Black people that I've had to check him on too. And we check each other. We help each other grow and become better people. That is what an interracial relationship does. It helps you grow and to become a better person. It exposes you to another culture, but it does not absolve you from the problematic things that you have had ingrained in you. As a Black person, yes, I do understand how it feels to be ostracized, how it feels to be marginalized. I understand that, but I do not understand how it feels to be marginalized as a Latinx person, as an Asian American person, as an Indian American person. So that means that because I'm not in those groups and because I watch television that teaches us white supremacy, that bogs on us on white supremacy, and all these things are so influential in our lives that there are certain microaggressions that we take on that we don't even realize we are perpetuating. And to have friends like that, to have people around our lives that are going to check us on those things, that is how we grow. That is how we become an anti-racist in this world.
Amen. That's a word right there. Like, all I have to say is an exception does not make a rule. Like, just because you have an exception for this one person you're not racist to, doesn't mean you're not racist to other people.
Baby, and that's on what? Period. So I think we reached the end of our conversation for today. As always, guys, we are getting into our next segment, which is my favorite. So many little girls and boys grow up never really knowing the full scope of their culture has contributed to society and history. So it's time for that to change. So let's take a pause, rewind, and remind the world just how we did that. So this particular post comes from the little known Black History Facts article by PBS, and it's about interracial marriage in the United States that was banned in 1664 and that overturned into 1967. Now, during the 17th and early 18th century, the growing number of interracial marriages between Blacks and whites led to the passage of this new law. The first anti-miscegenation law enacted was in the colony of Maryland in 1664, and additional colonies quickly followed suit. Now, these marriages were prohibited, and penalties included the enslavement, exile, or imprisonment of the white perpetrators. Now, these laws grew and evolved over years, and attempts were even made to modify the Constitution to ban interracial marriage in all states. Now, it would take 300 years for this law to be overturned. Now, in 1967, Richard Loving, a white man, and Mildred Jeter, a Black woman, were married in the District of Columbia. Now, when they returned home to Virginia, they were arrested and convicted of violating the state's anti-miscegenation law. They each faced a year in jail time, and their case went to the Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court found in favor of the Lovings in the famous trial Loving v. Virginia. Now, they ruled that prohibiting interracial marriage on state and local levels was unconstitutional. This meant that marriages between races were legal in the country for the first time in 1664, since 1664, excuse me. So in 2000, Alabama became the last state, in 2000, just 20 years ago, y'all, became the last state to officially legalize interracial marriage by removing the unenforceable ban that is still contained in their state constitution. Daquon, that was 20 years ago.
I'm not surprised. Listen, Alabama is probably all against miscegenation. Yeah, they're late to a lot of things, but we did that. Mine's comes from blackpast.org, a great website if you're ever trying to look up Black history or just like want to know some more about some Black people in the past. So today I will be talking about June Bacon Bursey, who is best known for being the first on-air African-American female meteorologist. Bacon Bursey was also instrumental in making the atmospheric sciences more accessible to minorities and women. Born June Esther Griffin on October 3rd, 1928, Bacon Bursey was raised in Wichita, Kansas by her aunt and uncle. Her advanced education began with an emphasis in math at Friends University in Wichita, but soon her lifelong passion for science led her to transfer to the University of California, Los Angeles. In 1954, she became UCLA's first African American woman to graduate with a bachelor's degree in meteorology. Throughout her career, Bacon Bursey continually used her outspoken drive to push the field towards accessibility for minorities and women. In 1975, Bacon Bursey co-founded the American Meteorological Society's Board on Women and Minorities. Through the board, she started a science fair program in 1976 to encourage students of color and white girls in elementary and high school to pursue careers in science. Then in 1977, Bacon Bursey used a portion of the $68,000 prize she won on a game show, and she used the $128,000 question to create a scholarship with the American Geophysical Union to support women studying atmospheric sciences. But she additionally aided Jackson State University, a historically Black university, in establishing their meteorology lab. Continuing her passion for encouraging young students, Bacon Bursey, after leaving government work in 1987, went to earn a teaching credential and dedicated the remainder of her career to teaching elementary and high school math and science classes.
Great. That is amazing. I think that we did that honestly and truly. Like, they be shaking me because I'm like, girl, what? What we did? We did it. I'll be so shook. And it's like, just realizing just how much we don't know is the reason why we created this segment on the show. Is because there's so much about Black history that is lost in the sauce. So it's nice to give voices back to the marginalized, honey. So thank you guys so much for joining us this week. This was a very enlightening conversation. I really enjoyed this. As always, please keep the conversation going down in the comment box below. We do respond and we do read those comments. We love to see your experiences. How do you feel about this particular topic that we talked about, and what are your experiences with it? Remember that this is also a podcast. Please rate and review our podcast on Apple iTunes. Definitely listen to it on Spotify. If you can't watch it, girl, we don't mind. We don't mind. You can listen to it too. It's fine.
In the car.
You can listen to the car on your way home, girl. It's fine. So don't forget to follow me at Quaviondre, at Andre Talks a Lot, and also following Daquon at Daquon950 on Instagram. Like I said, guys, we will see you all next week. Thank you so much for joining this conversation, bitch. We will see y'all next time. Bye.